Hello, welcome to today's Understood Chat. I'm Meg on the Understood team, and I'm very excited to have Bob Cunningham, advisor in residence, with us here today to talk about boosting your child's executive function skills. So Bob, can you just tell our watchers today a little bit more about yourself and your expertise?
Sure. So I work with the Understood team, giving advice, and I'm a resource on learning and attention issues. I'm experienced educator who has been a teacher and administrator in both public and private schools. I've also taught at the post-secondary level at Columbia University and done a bunch of other stuff around working with families and their kids who have learning and attention issues. So happy to be here and to talk a little bit about executive functions.
Amazing. Well, we are excited to tap all of that knowledge that you have, so I'm going to dive straight into the first question. So often we think of problems with when we think of problems with executive functioning, we think of disorganization. Isn't there more to executive functioning than just being disorganized?
Yeah, so there really is more to just being organized or disorganized. Executive functions are a very broad range of abilities and skills. And they're the things that our brain has the ability to do that give us the ability to kind of play with ideas, right? That's a phrase you hear a lot when you talk about executive function. So to have ideas and to act on them and to kind of organize them, all of that sort of stuff, to take an adequate amount of time thinking about things before we act on it, to encounter new or unexpected situations and kind of know how to manage our responses to that novelty, to resist temptations, and even to kind of stay focused. So those are sort of the core executive functions. Things like planning and organization, all of that sort of layers on top of those core components.
So you kind of touched on this, that there are those kind of core components. So many researchers see executive functioning as a group of kind of three skills: working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. Can we start kind of with working memory and tell us what that is and what we mean when we're talking about that?
Sure. So that's exactly right. That's where kind of research is coalescing right now: working memory, inhibitory control, which is one of my favorite things, and cognitive flexibility. So working memory is the ability to hold information in your mind and manipulate it. So you're able to mentally manipulate verbal or visual information that you're holding in your mind. It's different from short-term memory. So when you have kids with executive function issues or learning and attention issues, you'll often hear about working memory, and you'll also hear about short-term memory. Those things are different because working memory is information that you're going to manipulate in your mind. Short-term memory is just holding the information.
I think that's a really helpful set of definitions for our parents to know going into this conversation. I will admit that I wasn't exactly sure about the difference between the two, so thank you for that. We have questions from parents rolling in, so we're going to dive right into those. Our first question comes from Liz, and she has a son who's 13, and he's dyslexic and dysgraphic. He resists the basic act of becoming organized, maybe because beginning the process is overwhelming, and that's followed by a question mark. So how does she get him on board to be more organized?
So when you think about getting organized, as it relates to executive functions in particular, you're thinking about both planning and then acting, right? So that's why you need working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control, is so that you can come up with a good plan for being organized, but then also act on it. And act on it requires initiation and follow-through, right? So those are the three areas I'd encourage you to really look at to figure out what is breaking down for your particular child. Is it the planning of how to be organized? Is it the initiation of getting organized? Or is it the actual kind of then sticking to it that is problematic. And I think that you in particular mentioned the actual initiation of tasks. So what I would suggest is backing up to the plan and making sure that your child kind of has a good plan, and that it's a plan that was created at least in large part by your child. Because if it's created by you, or if it's created by a teacher, then there's much less likely to be success with actually initiating the plan. So once you have a plan that's largely generated by your child, and that might mean that you have to make compromises in your expectations, but trust me when I say it will be worth it in the short and long run for your child. So go ahead and figure out what his or her plan actually is, support that, and then limit it to just the first step at first. So all of the praise you give, all of the encouragement that you give, all of the support you give should really just be for that first step of initiating it. Once that's done, it's a win for your child. Don't insist that he follows through on the other steps of getting the organization done, at least not for a period of several weeks. And that's an important point. Several weeks, not the next time, not an hour from now, but really a couple weeks of just getting over that initiation hump. So I would work on both the planning and then that initiation together and limit it to just that first step.
I think that's really helpful advice, especially the part about, having the child have ownership in the planning so they really can think through how they can best do it. And of course, we always encourage our parents to advise and support, but really letting the kid have that autonomy is such a helpful hint. So thank you for that. And also the timeline that, this isn't something that you tell them once and they're suddenly going to get it, but it's something that needs to be repetitive and a skill that's built for that child. Our next question comes from Andy Can, and he says, how do you help build executive function skills such as working memory and processing speed?
Sure. So one of the things we know from research is that all of the executive functions, all of the executive functioning skills are susceptible to intervention. So these things can be improved. So if you have a child with executive function issues, there are things you can do to improve them. And the research around executive functions is becoming more and more clear that there are two characteristics of anything you try that have to be in place for it to be really successful. The first characteristic is that the demands you're placing on the child have to continually increase. So once you've done something for a period of time, you've got to then up the ante, up the game kind of for the child, in order for them to actually grow in the executive function area, whether it's working memory or processing speed or whatever that is. The second thing is that repeated practice is key. And we have some really good understandings from studies that were done in schools where basically these little modules with executive function skills were tried. And then other folks were trying sort of stuff that was integrated throughout the school day. And the impact of that integration throughout the school day and the multiple times of practicing things each day over a long period of time, rather than the one intense burst of like a module-based intervention, was really, really spectacular. So the module-based intervention had some gains, but that kind of prolonged effort around practice in different settings and with different activities is what really shows great benefit to kids with executive function issues. So you can do things for working memory, like practicing visualization skills or practicing think aloud kind of questions when you're reading with the child, or playing cards. Actually, memory games are very good for a child. So all of that kind of stuff is good practice, but you have to do it often and over a good period of time, and you have to keep increasing the expectation every couple weeks for the child in order to really improve those skills.
Thanks, Bob. And to our user, that asked that question. We do have articles on Understood just about this topic. Bob gave some really good examples of the memory games and think aloud questions while reading, but we've definitely got even more content on Understood, and so be sure to check that out for, we've got an article called 8 Working Memory Boosters, and so we've got that there, and then also our community. This is a great time to tell you that other parents, other teachers have wonderful ideas for that, so that's another great resource. This next question, Bob, comes from John H, and he says, my 8-year-old keeps throwing fits over tiny things. Where do you recommend we come down on the spectrum of letting him go versus telling him to quit immediately?
So this is a good example of kind of cognitive flexibility, right? So we have an 8-year-old who is not exhibiting flexible thinking. And flexible thinking means kind of outside the box thinking and also taking the perspective of others. So in a situation like this, I would actually recommend activities that encourage the child to take the perspective of others, whether that's through reading or television watching and talking about what each character's perspective might be. An 8-year-old is certainly old enough to engage in that. It can also be small role play that you do, where you develop characters together with your child. So my suggestion is that the time to intervene around this kind of cognitive inflexibility is actually before that behavior is occurring. So not when she's having that difficulty, but when she's not having that difficulty, practice some of those flexible thinking activities. And again, practice them over time and multiple times each day. And I think you'll see improvement in that cognitive flexibility. As to insisting that a child does something that they're not comfortable with, that can work sometimes. Often it doesn't. So I wouldn't create a hard and fast rule for you. That usually doesn't work. I think you have to use your instincts as a parent to say either the risk of further poor behavior outweighs the potential reward, or the reward is going to outweigh any risk of future or current kind of poor behavior. So, if you're in the middle of a public place and the kid is drawing a lot of attention and you're inconveniencing other people, then I would certainly say you have to just be consistent and get done whatever you need to get done. If you're at home and these are things that are under your control, then I think practicing some intervention strategies, that sort of stuff would be helpful. Understood has a great tool called the parenting coach. And if you use the parenting coach around an 8-year-old and describe some of the difficulties, parenting coach will actually offer you tips that you can try in order to improve in that.
Awesome. And I think we're going to drop that link for Parenting Coach in the chat box for our watchers today. So thanks for bringing that up, Bob. That's another great resource for our users. This, I think, is a question that maybe a lot of parents have that Kim is asking. And she's asking, how does anxiety impact executive functioning?
Yeah, it doesn't have a great impact on executive functions. So I can start with that.
Okay.
One thing about executive functions that you have to really kind of think about is that social, emotional, and physical health play a really important role in both developing and executing on executive functions. So that's why when we work with families, I will often start with, how does your child sleep? How does your child eat? What are kind of the stressors going on around him or her at this time in their life? Those sort of things, because things like that and exercise all have been very clearly shown to impact executive functions. If those things are intact and in place, your child sleeps well, they eat well, they exercise sort of regularly, that sort of stuff, they're much more likely to have better executive functions than if that isn't the case. So start with some of those underlying conditions, right? I think that when you really think about anxiety itself, there's a big difference between stress and anxiety and actually an anxiety disorder, right? So if you have a child who experiences sort of ebbs and flows of stress and anxiety, that's all of us, right? Some it affects more than others. If you have a child with actual anxiety issues that get in the way of everyday functioning, then that's something you really need to talk about with a doctor or with a therapist so that you can create a good treatment plan around the anxiety. Executive functions are kind of the first things to go when a child experiences significant anxiety. So again, if it's an ongoing concern, you need to address that right away with a psychologist, with a medical doctor, with a psychiatrist, to get a good plan in place. If you're noticing that executive functions fall apart when your kid gets stressed or nervous or a little anxious, that's different, because then you can go back to those strategies that we were talking about earlier to help her get strategies in place that will improve the executive functions so that she can then rely on those to kind of get her out of the anxiety. If the anxiety is really serious, that's not going to help.
Thanks, Bob. I think that's helpful, too, for parents to know, that there can be levels of anxiety, and it's something that maybe we all experience in a little bit, but if it is that consistent kind of overwhelming thing, that that's a time to seek outside resources. This next question, it isn't really a question, but we're going to work through the comments. Cindy has said that she's given flexibility to her 16-year-old to come up with a plan, and it's already failed, but he won't let her help him. So kind of what are the next steps if she's tried the plan, but it's not working?
Yeah. Then find someone else to help him. I mean, I know that sounds like sort of an obvious response, but it's so important because, parent-child dynamics are very complex relationships. And so if this is creating tension between you and your child, it's not worth it. That's a situation where having a friend or a caring relative or a teacher or a specialist at the school or outside of the school, have someone else step in and help to scaffold the organization plan. You're not going to get anywhere. If your back's up about it and your child's back is up about it, that's a non-starter right from the get-go. So you want to extract yourself kind of from that situation. And in that case, your only role really would be cueing. So once a plan is in place and that sort of stuff, you can still have the responsibility to cue your child in terms of the plan, but any kind of discussion or cajoling or anything like that kind of needs to stop, and that responsibility needs to be taken on by somebody else.
I think that's helpful. I think it's maybe something parents don't think about often is that it can be even more helpful to take a step back and look at other resources and options versus always trying to be the person that's there to fix it, even though that might be a first instinct for many of our parents. Our next question comes from Kat, and Kat has a daughter who's only 7 and is in 2nd grade. They just learned that she is dyslexic and has poor executive functioning and processing speed. Also, she suffers from severe ADHD. What is the best thing for her to do right now at such a young age to start building and helping with the executive functioning?
So the best thing to do with those kind of circumstances is to create a really strong team, right? So make sure that, you are being the kind of conductor and the point person, but that you have the right support inside of school, outside of school, at home with your family, that sort of stuff. And all of those efforts, can be coordinated by you, of course, but don't try to do this alone when the profile of your 7-year-old is that complex, right? So make sure that you have good assistance in that. With regard to executive functions, so that's going to interplay with dyslexia, it's going to interplay with ADHD and everything else that you mentioned, because executive functions are part of kind of every condition that we call a learning and attention issue. So I would suggest when it comes to executive functions, one of the things you're going to have to do is prioritize. And if you use those 3 core elements as a guide, so if you think about working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. Getting your different support professionals involved in those is going to be important. You can start with your psychologist or your MD around the inhibitory control. They can help you develop a plan for that, for the impulse control and the sustainability of attention, that sort of stuff. For the working memory, that will probably be the easiest one. Not that working memory issues are easy, but the easiest one for you as a parent to target directly. So those games and strategies we talked about earlier around improving working memory, parents tend to be able to do very effectively with their children. Again, sustained practice over a long period of time and increasing the demands gradually over time are the two key things. And then the third one is the cognitive flexibility. And this is the one where you're likely to need the most help. So really getting your school involved or finding an outside professional to help you with the flexibility and the thinking and the taking others' perspectives, things like that, is going to be your best bet. So I guess what I'm encouraging is be the conductor, but kind of divide and conquer in a lot of these issues. Don't try to go this alone.
We talk about that a lot on Understood, about how parents really are going to be more successful when they create a strong support team, whether that's, outside professionals or, getting to know your teacher, getting to know your para, getting to know the special ed teacher, whoever it is that's working with your child and kind of with them day in and day out. If you can have a relationship that is one of camaraderie and moving forward with your child, it's going to be just a better experience for your child and everyone else involved. So thanks for kind of reiterating that point for us there. This next question, I hope that you understand a little bit better than me. So this person is Eric, and he's saying, I'm a teacher consultant, and he had a request for an assistive technology executive function evaluation. Is there a single assessment for this? And he says, I thought that the AT feature match was based on EF assessment results.
The AT teacher what?
Feature match. So the assistive technology.
Oh, the AT feature match was based on executive function results?
Yeah. So is there a single kind of EF assessment?
Yeah. So normally executive function can be taken into consideration in an assistive tech eval. Assistive tech evals are typically broader than that, and they look at a bunch of different areas. And then executive function evals can be done, or evaluations that focus on executive function, but don't necessarily focus on AT. So you might actually want to explore kind of both paths at the same time, rather than trying to explore them sort of tied together. But if you have an assistive technology evaluator who is very fluent in executive function and how to assess it and the kinds of interventions that are successful, certainly technology can be a big part of helping with executive function difficulties. On the converse, executive functions are required to effectively use a lot of assistive technologies. So you have a chicken and an egg situation sometimes. That's why I would look at them as parallel rather than as kind of the same evaluation. So that would kind of be my recommendation. I think I understood what the community member was asking, but if I was wrong and kind of missed the mark on that, go ahead and write back in and I'll try and do better.
Thanks, Bob. And Eric, let us know if you need more clarification on that. So, Bob, it looks like we have quite a few educators in our audience today, and so we have an educator-specific question coming at you now from Olivia. And she says, as an educator, how do you help a child that struggles with focusing on assignments and subscribing to classroom rules that requires them to sit still and perform in a particular way? And we have some people that have echoed very similar kind of questions as Olivia's.
Sure. Do you want the answer that your administration is going to appreciate, or do you want the actual answer is the question here? Because the bottom line is, if a child has ADHD or another condition that is causing those sorts of issues for the child, if the child could do that, the child would do that. So you have to go into that situation assuming that it's not that the child does not want to do that, but it's that the child can't. So it's up to the adults, meaning, unfortunately, you, fortunately, you, are going to need to make the changes that are required to allow that child to be successful in your class. And I have this conversation with teachers daily, and certainly when I go out and present to teacher audiences and things like that, this question comes up very frequently. And everybody would love the silver bullet here, and everybody would love an explanation that is different. But being honest with you, and in my kind of 20 years around this, the only thing that is successful when it comes to having a child improve in those areas in your classroom is for you as the adult to make the changes that allow that child to do it. So if your list of class rules is 5 long and that child can really only manage 2 of them, then you start with those 2 and build on a 3rd, and then eventually a 4th, and then eventually a 5th. But when I say eventually, again, I don't mean next hour or tomorrow or even next week. It's usually a multiple week process to build up to it. And sometimes you will still encounter rules that the child simply cannot adhere to. And in that case, you have to find a socially acceptable replacement for that rule for that child. Same with sitting still in a desk. If you're expecting a child with a hyperactivity related to ADHD to sit still for a concentrated period of time, your expectation is unreasonable. So you need to provide opportunities for movement, or you need to provide fidgets, or you need to provide jobs that student can do in order to move. Because simply saying you have to sit there, and you're not sitting there, so I'm going to give you a check because you're not sitting there, and you're not sitting there, so I'm going to give you a consequence for not sitting there, it's not going to get you anywhere. These are brain-based conditions. So if you know your child has this brain-based condition, you should treat it as you would any other kind of thing that is going on with the child in that regard, and make the accommodations yourself, because the child is clearly, because of the way they're acting in your class, not able to do what is expected.
Thanks. I think that's helpful for all of those people out there that really, you have to think about how you can make customizations and really kind of personalize that learning environment for those kids who, might just follow the rules a little bit differently.
And one of our founding partners for Understood is CAST. And if you look at our website, you can click through to their website and their information, and they have a lot on how you can plan and how you can provide multiple ways of doing things for that child, and multiple ways for that child to show you what they've learned and how they want to be successful kind of in your class. So go there, look at some of the resources on Understood. But this is maybe the most important question we'll get in today's chat. And it really is incumbent upon you as the adult, the caring adult who wants this child to improve. You wouldn't be part of this chat if you didn't, right? So as the caring adult, it's incumbent upon you to make it possible for that child to be successful in the class.
All right. So this next question is one that's from a particular parent, but we've got a couple questions that are, again, very similar to it. So Liz has asked, we've tried to incorporate goal and benchmarks into my 15-year-old son's IEP. He has dyslexia, anxiety, and ADD. However, the school seems to be clueless in how to assist him in developing the skills needed for those goals in the IEP. And then some follow-up questions or comments were, yes, my school is not supporting my 504, etc. So I think the question here really is working with schools to make sure that IEPs, 504s, these kinds of plans are effective and being executed in the classroom.
Sure. And on Understood, we have a lot about effective IEPs. And one of the things that is so important is that the IEP is written kind of in a SMART format. So specific, measurable, all of that kind of stuff. And that's definitely throughout the Understood site. And if you do that, if the goals are written that way and they progress logically down through specific objectives, and those specific objectives progress logically back up to that overarching goal, I think you'll have much more success in this regard. And the difference is that the goal is sort of a broad thing that you want the child to accomplish. The objectives are how you're going to get there. So each of those objectives should spell out what the school is going to do to make sure that your child is eventually able to achieve that goal, right? So that's how you create accountability on the part of a school, is by looking at those objectives and making sure that they include the steps necessary kind of to get to that goal. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that the IEP may not be specific enough as it's written. You can, in fact, include specific strategies in an IEP. So if working memory is an issue or something like that, you can put in, and here are the sort of activities that we're going to use to improve working memory. Then you just go back to those two things I keep saying. They've got to be increasingly challenging, and they've got to be done in a sustained way over a period of time. So as long as the IEP reflects those things, I think you'll see much better results than you are right now. 504 is a little bit different because it typically revolves only around accommodations. So if your child is actually needing specialized instruction around those skills that are going to allow them to be successful in the classroom, then you may have the wrong kind of document in place. You might actually need to pursue an IEP instead of a 504 plan. And that can actually be your support for why you need to pursue an IEP instead of a 504. So if they're saying your child only needs accommodations, your response can be, actually, my child needs the instruction that's going to be necessary to build the school skills that would allow the accommodations to actually be effective for them.
Thank you, Bob. I think you have answered a ton of really important questions today. And unfortunately, we are over time, and there are questions still out there unanswered. And so to those of you watching who maybe wrote a question and it didn't get answered by Bob live on camera right now, below me on the screen right now, you can see a link to u.org/community. We have experts like Bob and moderators in there every day. And if you put your question in there, we ask that you kind of give us the details that we need to really give you effective answers. So the age your child might be, what they're struggling with, kind of where you think you need help. The more specific you can be in your question, the more helpful and specific we can be in our answers. So if you go post your question in the community, there are tons of boards with different topics. And if you don't find it, you can start kind of finding a place to put that question. So we really encourage you to go there and get your answers. We thank you so much for watching today. And Bob, thank you for being with us. You're always incredible. And we hope everyone else has a great day. You can see this chat archived on u.org/archive later. Thanks. Have a great day.